At the end of flowchart 3, the motion to close debate passed. When that happens, the chair will ask, are there any points or motions on the floor? So now I want you to go over to flowchart number 4. We'll be done with the flowcharts when we're done with this. Now what's happening is the committee is moving into voting block. So if you're the delegate from Cameroon, right, you would say, if you raise your placard horizontally, if you're recognized, the chair would say, Cameroon, for what reason do you rise? For what motion do you rise? They'll use different terminology. And then you'll say, thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Cameroon moves to enter into voting block. Now, at this stage of the game, the chair is unlikely to ask for additional motions. People are sort of tired and they're ready to move on. And so if you look at the text box with the arrow pointing to the right, like I say, you'll see it says at this point the motion is very unlikely to fail. Like I said before, the delegates are really ready to move on at this point. They're either done with the topic and want to move on to the next topic, assuming there's time, or sometimes what's happening is the conference is coming to an end, and so you have to get into voting block because you have to vote on the resolutions before the conference actually ends. Now, if you look at the text box the next text box with the arrow pointing to the left, you'll see that the motion to enter into voting block requires a 2/3 majority. If this motion passes, the door to the committee room is locked. Symbolically, usually they just stick a sign out there that says voting block. Now what this means, and this is true, is that once the committee goes into voting block, delegates who leave the room cannot re-enter, and they will enforce that. If you get up and go to the bathroom, you won't be able to re-enter. Delegates who are out of the room at the time when the committee votes to go into voting block won't be allowed in the room. Now sometimes, whoever's hosting the conference tries to tell professors, such as myself, that I can't go into the room during voting block. You can just imagine what I tell them, okay? Because the way I explain to them, I'm never a dick about it, but I say, look, part of the class is understanding how students do in voting block. So in order for me to do my job, in order for me to give grades, I need to see how my delegates are performing. As you'll find out, other Model United Nations programs are student-run. There is no faculty advisor, and so there's no reason for their head delegate to come in or out of the committee room during voting block. Here, hang on one sec while we finish recording. My father-in-law just got up. So, when you're in voting block, talking is not permitted. You can't talk with other delegates. Also, when you're in voting block, notes can't be passed. And they're usually very strict about it. Every once in a while, people in the back will do it. The chairs won't call it. Don't do it. It's incredibly disrespectful. Those are like clear rules that you should always be following. The first thing that's going to happen once you enter into voting block is you're going to begin by dealing with the amendments. There are the friendly amendments and then there are the unfriendly amendments. Remember, I talked to you before, I said that in the other video, I said friendly amendments are submitted after the authors panel, right? And so what will happen is the chair will begin by explaining the friendly amendment. So if there's an amendment to draft resolution 1.4 or 1.1, whichever one it is, the chair will explain what the friendly amendments are and just tell the committee what's changed. This doesn't require a vote by the committee because, again, if all the sponsors of a draft resolution agree, then the amendment is made. Now, sometimes the chairs will talk about it when each of the resolutions are voted on, so it'll be up to the chair. Unfriendly amendments are a different story. Now, remember, an unfriendly amendment, which also has to be submitted before voting block, is an amendment in which at least one of the sponsors of a resolution doesn't agree. And this requires a vote. Right now, there are two approaches sort of procedurally to dealing with unfriendly amendments. In some cases, what will happen is the chair will just explain the unfriendly amendment and then move to a vote. So the chair will say, this is the unfriendly amendment for this draft resolution, explain what it does, and then say, all those in favor of this amendment, please raise your placards now. All those opposed this amendment, please raise your placards now. Since this is a substantive vote, it's on policy, the chair will ask for abstentions, right? And if your voting status is present, if you said present at roll call, you don't have to vote. Of course, if you said present and voting, you have to vote, which is why we don't say present and voting. If you want to abstain, why forego that option? Now, alternatively, the chair might explain the unfriendly amendment and then ask for points or motions. And that's where the black arrow is pointing to the top of the page and then a little bit to the right. In that case, what can happen is the chair will say, thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Don't forget to look at your delegates. Cameron moves for a 2-for, 2 against with a 45-second speaking time on the unfriendly amendment. And by the way, if the chair does it at his or her own discretion, they may have 2 people come up and argue for or against the resolution, the amendment. You won't have to make a motion. So it's going to be up to, my point is that some chairs are going to do this at their own discretion. Other chairs are going to leave it up to you. If you make that motion for 2-for, 2 against with a 45-second speaking time on the unfriendly amendment, chair is going to say that motion is in order. Now, they may take additional motions because some people might motion for 1 for, 1 against. Some people might want the speaking time to be longer. So the chair may take motions. But if you said it the way I just described, the chair will say that motion is in order. Now, let's imagine that they're voting on your motion for the 2-for, 2 against on this unfriendly amendment. Now, if the motion fails, right, so you've moved for, Cameron has moved for a 2-for, 2 against with a 45-second speaking time, right? The chair said that motion is in order. If the motion fails, right, then the amendment loses because the committee doesn't even want to do the 2-for, 2 against, at which point the chair will just ask about the amendment itself. You know, all those in favor of this amendment, please raise your placards now. All those who oppose this amendment, please raise your placards now. And since this is a substantive vote, again, the chair will ask for abstentions again. So that's the way that process will work. If there are then once that amendment is dispensed with, the chair will move on to other friendly amendments and the process will start over again. So either there will or there won't be 2 for and 2 against. Now, if the motion passes, what the chair will do is select 2 delegates, 2 to speak in favor and 2 to speak against the unfriendly amendment. And they'll come to the front. Usually the speaking time is relatively short. So if that motion passes, the chair will say, delegates wishing to speak in favor of this amendment, please raise your placards now. And then the chair will pick 2 people. Oftentimes, if somebody made the motion, they'll give them the opportunity to be somebody speaking for or against. Then after they pick 2 people to speak in favor, the chair will say, delegates wishing to speak against this amendment, please raise your placards now. Delegates will raise their placards if they want to speak against it. The chair will then again pick 2 people. And then once they're set, the chair will say, okay, and recognize somebody for, recognize somebody against, recognize somebody for, recognize somebody against. And once they've made their arguments in for or against, then the chair will do the same thing, right? All those in favor of this amendment, please raise your placards now. All those opposed, please raise your placards now. Again, you can abstain. And then after the vote, the chair will move to the next unfriendly amendment, depending on whatever the disposition was. So if the unfriendly amendment passes, it gets added to the draft resolution. If the unfriendly amendment fails, then it doesn't. Right after all of the unfriendly amendments are dispensed with, now what we have the draft resolutions that have been adjusted accordingly based on whatever the committee has done. And now it's finally time to vote on the draft resolutions, right? Now, some chairs will begin the voting at their own discretion. They may do like The chair would highly smile upon a motion to vote on draft resolutions. If the chair asks for points or motions, what you can do is Cameroon, if you're working on draft resolution 1.1, is you can say Cameroon moves to vote on draft resolution 1.1, or alternatively, if you know for sure, or if the chair has highly smiled upon this motion, you can say, thank you, Honorable Chair, and fellow delegates, Cameroon moves to vote on all draft resolutions. And these motions will definitely pass. Now, on the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 4 different ways that the committee can vote. 3 of them are pretty basic. 1 of them, as you'll see, is kind of complicated.